The advantage of using pre-recorded items passed off as live is you get to use any post-production effects you want in the post-production CGI era, and you can scene blend free-fall drops or use some more complex props without the risk of error in the pre-post-production CGI era. This is very different from the live interaction with the control room. You pre-record your action sequences and audio from the Actonauts, and then the Capcom reads the script live in the theatre of the control room. So let me show you how it works on the minimal and easiest setting. I have sped up the footage with no communication and slowed it down for the part with communication. This is the total audio interaction for the scene. The U on the cue cards represents the Capcom. We're looking at this from his perspective.
Houston, we started to maneuver to deploy attitude.
Okay, we see that.
So on the back of that tiny interaction, we get to smuggle in all of this as live, with as many shuttle resets, scene blending, do-overs, prop work, cuts and edits as you like. So this would require opportunity. There are different layouts at different control centres and different designs over different decades. However, here we see the division of labour, as those not in the know at the front are busy watching numbers on their screens, and those in the know at the back are communicating with the shuttle, and certainly have the opportunity to be working off scripts. It even looks like they have an active one. So let's take a look at the next level up. The degree that you can take this will be based upon the theatrical skills of the Capcom. So here we have the mission clock, a must-have in any control room, and the cue cards with the timings on. In this slightly more complex audio interaction, the Capcom speaks first. However, this is really easy to do if you know the timings.
Discovery Houston, we're back on TV through Goldstone Mila with in-cabin TV.
We copy. We're standby for MC4.
Discovery Houston, we'd like to boil some water. We'd like rad out temp to high.
Rad out to high. Just came in a sunrise tally-ho on the target, and it's right in the middle of the coalesce.
Outstanding. Can you see the lever yet?
We're looking. Jeff says he can see it spinning, and we're trying to get a spin rate.
Remember that audio from the Actonauts is pre-recorded, and the Capcom is doing live theatre with cue cards for timings. The audio is minimal in this style, but sufficient enough to smuggle in the whole downlink as live. In the post-production CGI era, they played this fiddle hard. So let's see if I can play the game. I will leave a dramatic pause for effect. I've deleted the ground controls comments. Columbia, Houston, we're bringing out a large screen TV here on the ground, showing Dilly Gill's latest release if you want to see it. Oh, and wave if you think he's the best channel at exposing the NASA fraud. Over.
They better hurry, because I think we're on our way past.
It is actually pretty easy if you know the script, and if you're good at this sort of thing and quick-witted, unlike me, who's a bit of a stumbling fool, definitely not the theatre type. So what if this goes wrong? Well, if you're quick-witted and you know the script, then you can always get back on track. It's called improv, and then the Actonauts get preference. Here on a live talkover, someone asks a question and the Actonaut just ignores him, even though what we're watching now is a live voiceover.
And here's the, coming up, probably the only time it'll ever be demonstrated, shooting the moon at 2,500 feet per second. That's not a smile on my face.
It demonstrates how audio confusion would be an expected thing. The ground controller never gets his answer.
Looks like a lot of fun. How much practice did that take?
Here we go with a demonstration of the skyrocket.
You can see how in the scripted event, audio confusion would look a little odd, but an error would not be game over. So the same technique is being used here. This is from STS-32 and in the post-production CGI era, and this is why understanding the technique NASA are using to pass this off as live with the theatre of space in the control room is so important. If I were a fanboy looking at this scene, believing it to be live, I would state this is proof of NASA's authenticity. What they will miss though is that all of this every single bit, can be explained by the special effects of the time, provided it is done in post-production. NASA can also, if they wanted to, switch from the studio to the shuttle and even back to the studio again using the massively advanced scene blending technology. It is on NASA's authority alone that we accept this as live. Those in the control room are not witnesses to the footage being authentic. There is no third-party independent corroboration. The whole thing is accepted as live exclusively on the audio interaction from the control room and NASA's authority. I've deleted the audio because it is the same principle as the others, a low amount of audio for the length of scene that can be worked off a script. The scene we were watching previously from STS-51D is recorded from the same area, only on the other side with the same Cyclops camera setup. To record a scene like this we are watching now, with high levels of apparent zero-G, back in the STS-51D era, where they would have to scene blend freefall after freefall, we do not get this lengthy footage. It is not that they could not have done it, I just think it was too time consuming to do it. They would have to do 22 drops at least for just this one scene from the air-launched rocket plane configuration, and we get 4 or 5 lengthy scenes from the STS-32 footage from this camera system. So we see now why there is such a difference in quantity of footage with high levels of zero-G effects between the two eras. There is identical capacity in recording technology. The same VHS camera tech is being used, only working from a studio and being able to produce high levels of apparent zero-G with post-production CGI was clearly far more efficient. It is so important that the honest inquirer has the chance to understand what I mean when I say that this can all be explained by special effects. I'm going to pause for a moment to show you a couple of things. Coming up is the most complex zero-G maneuver from the whole scene. So here we see her from her arrival to the point in question. The towels are CGI props, I will cover that in a minute, and so the handoff is a non-event, but still good work. I have shown how NASA have the opportunity to work theatre in the control room. In the risk versus reward equation, the risk is small and manageable, and the reward is huge. The motive is that they can pass off scenes like this as live, which enables them to smuggle in post-production CGI work, and even the control room drones are taken in. So here we see that the lady clearly passes under a solid object and a fellow actor. All I'm trying to establish here is the means. We have discussed the opportunity and motive, so the big question becomes, is there the technology around in this era to fake that maneuver? Jurassic Park is in production, which had heavy use of CGI and layering. All she needs for this scene is to be on a different layer. There's no evidence for or against within the footage, because the image quality is willfully low. However, I do have a blooper coming up to cover shortly. And here we see a sophisticated layering scene. This really helps to put into context what is possible in this era, and reminds us of the effort that goes into props and CGI for movie production. So we can see that the handoff of the CGI towel clearly is possible. The towel can be handed off between two people on different layers because it's pure CGI, and the layering technology to have her pass under the object and the actor is available and highly advanced. So she goes off screen and can be reintroduced back into the same layer if wanted. Further, any number of action cuts can be made in the studio situation using morphing tech to blend the scenes back together. We saw in the last scene the guy was interacting with the object, and yet in this scene the other guy is passing underneath. The object could be retractable for pass under parts to allow room for the wires, and push back out for interaction parts to assist the actors. It would then be covered by CGI in post-production to make it look continuously there. Are the movie people inventive enough to think of such a thing? Do we have the CGI capacity to do that in this era? You decide. So what of the floaty objects, cameras, towels and bags? In Jurassic Park they tracked and mapped regular animals and lizards, and then created the dinosaur movements based on those observations. With the objects and zero-G, they would be able to go aboard the zero-G shuttle and take their observations with interactions as well. They would then produce the wireframe animation that covers all basic maneuvers and interactions, which then gets filled in with the colour. Once each object is done, they have the basic framework for it. They then, after the actors have mimed the scenes, the effects people place the CGI objects wherever they need to go. So we can see that bags, towels, cameras, etc. would be very easy to produce once the initial framework is built. Lighting and shadow effects are possible on and with CGI in this era. That may all sound a bit incredible, so let's take a look at some more evidence consistent with a fraud from STS-32. First, I have to say that the actors are mostly not floating around the sets with their junk hanging out. We see this woman has a Superman outfit on, and despite its tightness, there is no obvious signs of rigging due to low vision quality and/or CGI work. Rigging arrangements would vary from scene to scene, and in a confined area like the shuttle, they would be pivoted from the side of the hips or the back area only. In this clip, I believe that bulge is her harness. It is under the clothing and changes in proportion as she moves around. I'm really happy to have people who have seen past the NASA fraud challenge my ideas. Pretending there is nothing to this though, fanboys, is your own business. Let's take a look at a couple of bloopers. Here we see the actor do a dramatic dive and then pulls on his clothes. What looks like rigging to me is seen momentarily. So this is what it looks like slowed down and in close up. The focus in this scene for the CGI people is on the floating objects, and this error was not addressed. This for me is evidence consistent with a fraud. I'm going to show you some bloopers from Jurassic Park to help you see how bloopers happen and are not all that easy to notice, but once you start to pay attention and look for them, they start to appear. For the Jurassic Park bloopers, this guy is going to help. He is ruthless, so JP fans might want to look away now.
Now in the very first scene, the gatekeeper gets eaten alive by the newest raptor of the clan. But what you might have failed to recognize is the arm of the concerned cameraman that thought the gatekeeper was going to be falling on his camera. Boom, there it is.
So the CGI work is time consuming. The guy with the short song will be spending time in the pit, and clearly they were thinking good mobility in and out was needed. Perhaps there was a flap of clothing to hide the harness, or the lighting was off. Who knows? They clearly thought though no one would notice, because they did not smudge it out nor patch it over. NASA were right though, because even when it is noticed and pointed out, the fanboys close their eyes and go to that happy place in their mind, where NASA are telling the truth and all is just as we're told.
Don't worry, they keep all the real dinosaurs behind this massive gate that goes on for miles and miles and miles. Or feet and feet. Well, let's hope the dinosaurs don't notice that.
The reason I'm showing these bloopers right now is because the section on the live theatre interaction with the control room is deductive reasoning. If all the NASA footage from all the STS missions were available, I would be able to find the evidence of the Capcom getting the script wrong. However, it would not constitute proof of fraud. The important thing I want to emphasize is that this is deductive reasoning, having considered the evidence as to NASA's authenticity first, and having reached the conclusion based on evidence that NASA are lying. I am now using deductive reasoning for this section. This is very different to the claim of deductive reasoning the philosophical materialists use for the theory of evolution. The reason it is different is because with the philosophical materialists, the commitment to there being no God comes first, and then the evidence is looked at and a narrative for the evidence is then offered. This is such an important distinction. However, it will be lost on the scientism mob because they do not understand how philosophical materialism really works and the agenda behind it. If you think that mindless evolution theory is driven by evidence rather than philosophical commitment, you need to look at the arguments against it from the proponents who are making the arguments and consider this while you are listening to their arguments. NASA is a total fraud, and the whole theory of mindless evolution gained traction on the back of a massive fraud called Piltdown Man. How many frauds does it take to break the grip scientism has on the minds of the general public? The name of science carries such weight in the minds of the general public that the moment the whoring mainstream media news networks mention it, the public lays down and rolls over because they gave up fighting that magic wand a long time ago. So let's hop back out of that rabbit hole and bring this technique a little more up to date. Without a doubt, NASA like to troll their fans and the general public. In this scene coming up, they're doing the water in the spacesuit troll, which works on several levels. Despite the hilarity of NASA filming spacewalks in a pool, and the look we have water inside the scuba gear spacesuit aspect, I do believe this was a planned event so they could smuggle in some post-production CGI using the theatre of the control room to pass it off as live. The spacewalks themselves are done in a pool, and the ground controllers interact live with the space divers in the pool in real time. However, when we move to the airlock scene and the unfolding drama of getting the actor's spacesuit off, we see the technique of the live theatre interaction with the control room being used. So I think we can tell this is a planned and scripted event because the CGI interaction of getting the spacesuits off is beyond what they could do with live augmented reality in that era. If they'd developed the level of live augmented reality interaction to get the spacesuits off, we would simply see bigger stunts in the interviews. The live interviews are always a good indicator of the level of technology they have to hoax us in real time. If it had been a real leak because the scuba spacesuit was really faulty, they would have just had a transmission error, which would have had its own drama anyway, and continued with audio comms only. So here we cut away to the control room. Note the sticker there. This looks like a lot of people in the those in the know seating. However, the leaky scuba spacesuit troll is an event they can roll people in for to add to the drama. These may well be the CGI team who did the work coming up shortly. As we look here at another poolside event, we can see the number of people needed to pull off the poolside scam is usually pretty low. We see the division of labour in this layout, as those in the know and communicating with the ISS are at the back right, and everyone else is front and centre. So as we race through this section, we have the local bowling alley guy doing his say what you see live talkover throughout the quieter sections of the presentation.
Cassidy's finishing up retrieving a few of these bags that were temporarily stowed before moving into the Quest airlock himself.
This section coming up is the transition between two techniques. I think the transition in imagery to pre-recorded happens just before the hatches close 2-minute timer. However, the transition in audio from live to pre-recorded occurs as the Capcom says, "Over to you," at the end of the 2-minute timer. The Capcom is the only one who is live after that point.
Okay, Shane, the hatch is closed and locked.
Chris, great job. Karen, over to you.
Okay. Okay, Luca, I don't know if you're able to see the UIA or if Chris can get it. Check the oxygen, 2 valves.
There is quite a bit of audio from here between Karen and the divers, which is pre-recorded, but only the bowling alley guy and the Capcom are live, and of those two, only the Capcom is working the script. BAG is just saying what he sees. So we will now fast forward so I can show you how little audio there is from the Capcom, and the Capcom interaction is what convinces everyone that this is live. I will cover every interaction from the Capcom and ignore the other pre-recorded audio.
Copy. And Houston, do you want us to stay in Pry or go to hardline?
Maybe I should have used an easier example.
Stay in Pry, Karen.
Where they did not transition between two techniques. However, this is a great example of this technique still being used, despite NASA now having live augmented reality.
Hey, Luca from Houston, how you doing? Give us the status. Copy all, Chris. We'll just status you from now on to check on him.
5.
The zero-G effects we see in this section could easily have been achieved
Copy, that's great news. Thanks, Chris.
with live CGI and augmented reality, which were available at the time. However, the upcoming section does require post-production work.
Very stable pressure after a couple minutes. Is it okay to continue or do you want us to wait from entire 3?
Karen, you're good to press.
Glove heaters off if you can.
I don't think I can reach.
Chris, press is fine for Luca.
I can get it.
Houston Station for Karen with some steps on the expedited suit docking.
Can you say again?
Hey, Karen, for the expedited suit docking procedure 4.115, we only need steps 6, 7, 12, and 13, and then we'll take it from there once you get the helmet off.
Okay, so you want to hold off on the safer and the tools until the helmet's off?
That is correct.
Do that.
Almost there, Karen. 12.
And Karen, one correction, we need step
12.2.
8 as well. So 6, 7, 8, 12, and 13.
Copy that.
Hey, Karen, another correction. We'll take steps 6 through 13, but you do not have to put them on the ETA.
Copy that.
Airlock Houston, if you could have some towels ready, that would be great.
We have them here.
Hatch is open, Shane. Lucas doing the crew lock.
Copy, Chris. Thanks.
There is more interaction from the Capcom, but I'm going to cut the audio because it continues in the same style, but far less of it. So all of that was for this. The climax if it were a movie, however with NASA, I want to call it the hook. The hook being the part that draws some people in so far they will never be able to get out. Despite all the errors in NASA footage, some people will have been taken under so far by this scene or a scene similar to this that they have believed was live that they can no longer get over it. You can see how powerful the theatre interaction from the control room technique is. They have smuggled in this pre-recorded scene with a simple yet clever audio trick. Although all of this has been complex to explain, you will soon see the pattern within the NASA footage if you watch as much as I do. Don't forget the Capcom is surrounded by people wishing him well in the fraud. He has his cue cards in the emergency depress booklet. Here he is putting it away. His team are defending their quarterback, but the opposition, those not in the know, are under their authority. It is perfectly orchestrated. Just look at the power of this scene. I can see why people are stuck on it, however it is their fault now. The NASA errors have been shown. They could, if they wanted, see the truth. But the hardcore globe cultists care not for truth. They prefer the lie, and want to trample everyone underfoot with their scientism delusions. The use of magic by those in power is documented in the Bible. Regardless of if you believe the Bible to be true or not, that is an interesting point. When Moses confronted Pharaoh in Exodus 7 verse 11, the Bible states, "But Pharaoh in turn called for the sages and sorcerers, and they too, the magicians of Egypt, did the same thing, making use of their secret art." The thing they were doing was turning a staff into a snake, and the thing NASA are doing is turning a stationary plane into a spinning ball. It's all just forms of magic. So it's not unreasonable to assume that when not dealing with Moses, the magicians of Egypt were busy wowing the general population, and because of the magic, the general public believed that the system that ruled over them had great power, might, and knowledge, and handed their authority over to that system. And that is the battle NASA have waged on us. To whom will we give our authority to? Whom will rule over us? Whom do we fear, God or man? NASA have claimed the heavens above for their own, so that people will believe on NASA and the authority of scientism over God. It really is quite stunning for me to see this now. NASA, though, is all just sleight of hand and secret art. I know how much that will irk the hardcore spellbound fanboys, but breaking the spell can lead you out of Egypt and the beast system. You're headed for the desert for sure, with an army of angry NASA fanboys chasing hot on your heels, and there will be some time in the spiritual wilderness required. This is not an easy transition to make, but you will finally have the chance to break the chains of the power system that bound you. The stated mission of Yeshua was to round up the broken-hearted and set the captive free. To those who, like me, find that mission statement of interest, the biblical advice would be to repent, don't look back, and seek the majesty of God. Just as the pyramids of Egypt loomed large over the population of the most powerful nation on earth at that time to project the might and authority of the pharaohs, so the space programs have loomed large over the populations of the most powerful nations on earth, projecting the might and authority of the rulers of our era to anyone with a television set. If Western society was to change for the better, it would require the people to repent first and turn back to God. Just a change of leadership would not be enough, in my humble opinion. The spiritual journey starts with cleaning up my own act, of course. Spiritual growth can take time, but now is a great time to start. The fear and reverence of God is the start of wisdom. This life is not all there is. It is my opinion that the live theatre interaction with the control room is one of the most effective of the tools of deception, and that is why I gave so much time to it. The rest of the tools from here on out are far more easy to explain. Having studied the FOIA request footage from STS-32, I can say that behind every mission or expedition from the post-production CGI era forward is enough footage to satisfy the control room drones and NASA TV subscribers that something substantial is happening on the mission. There also seems to be some bonus footage in that era for when the Zero-G shuttle landed, which would of course offer the opportunity for some pure unadulterated post-production work. Sometimes working out if something is a live talkover can be quite tricky. Other times it is stated or it becomes self-evident. The live talkover can use internal or external views and is set apart from the other tools of deception because there is no audio interaction that involves the actonauts' faces being in the scene, where their audio interaction seems to be in real time. That requirement having been satisfied, the type or level of interaction between the control room and the actonauts can be a factor to help determine what tool of deception is being used. So in this footage we are watching, it could actually be either the live theatre interaction with the control room, which would allow the actonauts more time to be hoaxing something else. However, there are a couple of points in the audio exchange that makes me think it is a live talkover. This first exchange made me think live theatre interaction with the control room.
Columbia, Houston, we see you at position 7, and for Marcia, Jim just read your card that came with your cake to the folks in the Mocher, and we're just about to cut into your high-calorie creation here, and thanks a lot from everybody down here.
You're welcome, you deserve it.
The live talkover was especially popular in the zero-G shuttle era because it allowed easy use of pre-recorded, often stocking filler internal footage or establishing shot external footage. The external footage stocking filler not only carries great weight as to their supposed location, but requires very little effort from the crew other than discussing the talking points, as the props and CGI team would produce this type of footage, and did not require any involvement whatsoever from the actors other than the final live talkover.
You still getting the picture, Houston?
That's affirmative, Dan. Video looks good.
Pretty nice one, isn't it?
It's absolutely outstanding. We're really enjoying the view, and we understand it's even more magnificent for you guys.
In the risk versus reward equation, the risk was none and the reward was huge. Obviously, the whole show was bolstered by the other tools of deception, and it would not have been enough on its own to have just the live talkover, but when the tools of deception are combined together, it makes powerful voodoo.
Columbia, Houston, looks like camera Delta is getting a little warm. We'd like you to power camera Delta off.
I like that little moment because it shows how the live talkover allows the control room drones, watching their screens of numbers, can get involved and believe they have a real job. So let's call the drone Baller Dave. He's watching his screen in his well-paid job. Poor old Baller Dave does not realise that all the screens of numbers him and his fellow drones are watching are all nominal, which by definition means that they exist in name only. So the change in his column of numbers is deliberate, not consequential, and the overheat on camera Delta is just done for effect. Nevertheless, he takes it to the Capcom and a live audio interaction occurs. He suddenly feels very special. His job itself is pretty dull, even though he has front row seats to the greatest deception in the world. But today he gets to go home and tell his wife how there was nearly a fire on the shuttle, but he, with masterful skill, was able to prevent it. And she gets to go to a tennis club the next day and tell her friends about it and ponder if space travel is really very safe. And the myth grows and gets cemented into the minds of men. So here is a second example of a talkover. This is on playback from the VHS system and happened while the actors were out of comms range.
Okay, here it's coming again.
And it's supposed to be a satellite firing its thrusters and going into geostationary orbit.
There you could just see some lightning that I was talking about before.
We heard in the last clip how they were complimenting the effects team on the quality of fakery. I feel in this one their compliments are insincere and the whole scene to be laughably insane as a representation of reality.
And Discovery, we're getting a picture now.
Okay, and there's the burn. It just started.
Roger, looks good from down here.
For those of you who are genuinely questioning the footage applied by NASA, you should ask yourself if you think this is evidence of their authenticity or evidence of fraud, limited by special effects of the era. I will grant it was ballsy of NASA to do this low quality effect. They could have just as easily not done it. I guess the standard response will be, Dilly Gill doesn't understand how hard it is to record stuff in space. I have to say to that, are you prepared to consider that if this were real, the footage obtained would be consistent with the video recording tech of the time rather than the special effects of the era? Also consider the errors people find with the NASA footage, and consider the question again. This horror show of a bad special effect according to you, is reality. The whole night image issue perplexed the NASA CGI and special effects team for decades.
And Discovery, Jeff, that lightning in the background certainly does make a rather spectacular show. Isn't it amazing?
It would not be this way if this were reality. On the budget NASA has and the scientific benefit of excellent footage, never mind the public interest perspective, NASA could have afforded a camera to record this phenomenon superbly well. To believe otherwise, to buy into the idea that it's just too difficult to find a camera that can record the night images, is to be so mentally feeble that I would say you have lost the ability for critical thinking.
Three, two, one, action. Alright, hello everyone, it is 2020.
So I must admit, I have not listened the whole way through this. However, I do believe this is a monologue. By that I mean there is no audio communication between the control room and the actonauts throughout the presentation. If there were some communication, then I would just refer you to the third tool of deception, which of course is the live theatre interaction with the control room. This walkthrough presentation, as every walkthrough presentation of its era does, has brought a new generation to a state of amazement at what a wonderful modern era we live in. These poor souls are mostly sufficiently good that they cannot comprehend how wicked NASA are, and it would not occur to them to think along the lines that all of these walkthrough style presentations can be explained by the special effects of their time. This is one of a long line of walkthrough monologue style presentations, and they even performed one in the Skylab era. I have studied all the walkthroughs I can find, including several from the shuttle era, some of which were on the Shuttle Mir rendezvous. Not all walkthrough presentations are monologues. However, all of them look as good as the special effects of the time would allow, rather than as good as the camera technology would allow. Despite ESA's claim that this particular walkthrough is recorded in one take, there are multiple edit opportunities, which means that the action did not have to be filmed all in one go. Modern day NASA edits in a highly CGI environment, combined with the ability to digitally manipulate any image, means there is really no limitation on cuts and edits, which allows complete changes in rigging wherever required. The one-take claim is yet another magic wand moment by your friendly space-faking team, where mere assertion is used and the people roll over in the holy name of science. The monologue style of production allows the use of unadulterated post-production effects and reduces the risk of error to as close to zero as possible. Like the other tools of deception, if the monologue were used just on its own, it would create suspicion, but when combined with the live tools of deception, it creates voodoo too powerful for the general population to battle against. There is often an introduction to the monologue which may or may not require the use of tool 3, but it is set apart from that tool by the lack of audio interaction with the control room within the presentation. So in the earlier analysis, I showed the post-production CGI available at the time for STS-32. Now I will show some images of the more recent techniques available to the masters of illusion. There is nothing groundbreaking in this breakdown. It's just helpful for those that are coming to terms with the NASA fraud to de-occult and demystify the NASA footage by showing the effects of this era and the advances in rigging arrangements.
Columbia, Houston. Columbia, Houston, we're ready for CCTV.
So let's take this tool of deception back to the shuttle era.
Okay, Houston, here it comes.
With the monologue presentation that launched my FOIA request for STS-32. In this monologue, they have opted for the audio introduction from the control room.
Morning, Houston, and it's a pleasure to bring you back aboard Columbia again. What we'd like to do today is give you a demonstration of some of the equipment we have on board the shuttle.
So I've cut the audio as this is pure monologue. In the footage easily available from NASA, this was a standout item as the earliest seemingly unedited piece with high levels of apparent zero-G that was of reasonable visual quality and of substantial length. I suspect there is film footage as long as this in earlier missions, however the short clips I have seen from these missions that are likely to be of longer length lack the substantial zero-G effect that this presentation from the post-production CGI era has in abundance. It is always hard to state categorically about the length of footage of each individual clip because of the utter stranglehold NASA have on the raw footage, which in itself is very perverse because if this were anything but a fraud, we could have expected much longer items than this one with equally substantial zero-G effects, arguably from Mission 2 forward. Further, if NASA were the real deal, at least the first decade of raw footage would have been sent to the universities and colleges for a record of prestige and for students to study. We can comprehend from the FOIA requests the reason this was not done was for the fear that the footage may have been lent from the engineering and science departments to the film studies departments, where the footage might have been closely examined by the people with the equipment to actually perform such a task, and the errors most likely would have been noticed, and with the full record available, the lack of substantive footage with high levels of zero-G effect would have been far more noticeable. By NASA holding on to the raw footage and presenting the multiple short clips only, people would naturally assume that a good record of internal living and working conditions was being taken. The Mission 16 FOIA request has blown that idea out the window. Far better for NASA to release the choice sections of footage in the early days, where despite the flawless zero-G shuttle footage, the fraud was still at its most vulnerable. NASA were comforted because they knew at the time the public were so undemanding of NASA in the form of raw footage. I guess the general public did not feel that they sat high enough at the scientism table and were too lowly to demand the footage, and NASA were not about to offer it up. We also see from the FOIA requests the pattern of fraud where there is less substantial internal footage from Mission 16 compared to Mission 32, and we could have reasonably expected those responsible for keeping a record of the missions to be hungrier at the start of the shuttle era for as much footage as they could get of internal operational procedures, so they could refine work procedures and troubleshoot problems, as well as use the footage to assist the training of new astronauts. The switching of video cassettes would have been a quick job lasting seconds, with a high yield of data beneficial for the ground crews to analyse. So here we're watching footage from the post-flight press presentation of STS-9, the first flight with a spacelab configuration. We can see there is no shortage of space for extra cameras and film to record the mission, and if this were actually reality, then we could expect to see several full working days worth of recording on the Cyclops VHS camera system of 12 hours or more per day, with the only interruption being that of changing the VHS cassette. Now, if you're holding on to the idea that perhaps this is in the vault somewhere, and if I were to ask for a FOIA request and show it is not there, then you might believe me, well, then you have missed the point. There is enough evidence consistent with a fraud, and enough errors for you to know already this is a fraud. I'm considering putting in a FOIA request for this footage, however for now, this comes under the omissions part of the fraud. We can see from this footage, and we know from the Skylab footage, NASA were happy to use the studio with props and wires as well as the zero-G plane footage. So we know longer sections of this footage will be in the archives, but we can already see from the footage available the dubious nature of it. The reason I'm showing you this shuttle early Spacelab footage is so you can see not only the dubious nature of it, but also that NASA had the opportunity prior to the post-production CGI era to record hours and hours, maybe even days and days of footage in undisputable zero-G, and have not produced such footage. This is the pattern of fraud I keep banging on about. There is the space and lowered launch weight to take enough VHS recorders and tapes to record the entire external footage from the mission, the entire internal footage from the mission, and all the experiments, and it would have only added around half an hour to the workload to switch the tapes. This is how we know it is all bullshit. At the time of recording this, if this were real, NASA would not have known how many missions they would be able to perform, and every ounce of footage would be valuable for the future. And for the first time in history, they had a way to record the footage through the VHS technology and the CCTV camera system that was lightweight and efficient. To fail to understand this point, and to dismiss NASA not taking this historic opportunity to record some hugely substantial footage of life in space, as bumbling incompetence on NASA's part, is to suffer again from the feeble-mindedness I mentioned earlier. I can already see several errors consistent with a fraud in this footage, and I will bet that there is hours of footage like this in the full-length footage at the expense of internal operational footage, and those friendly bumbling clowns at NASA did not quite capitalize on this opportunity to provide us with days of raw footage from the mind-bendingly expensive shuttle missions. So back to the monologue. Here is one more example of it. The original from NASA will be of better quality, I'm sure. However, as per the scam, finding original footage from NASA is never easy and often impossible. I always love the ones where they put a globe in it. Like a wholesale grifter, he has a globe in case you were to forget NASA are selling you the idea of a globe. This one may well be a helium prop, however the atom molecules for the ozone layer sales pitch are CGI. During this era, the space actors mime out the action first, and then the atom effects are put in post-production by the CGI team, and it is presented as a monologue through the medium of the control room to give it extra authority. NASA now have the technology to do a scene like this live. However, in the shuttle era, work like this had to be done post-production, and the monologue was a great tool to smuggle in post-production work. There is no audio interaction with the ground. He blithers on about the danger of the depleting ozone layer and how science on the shuttle will help save the day. All praise the holy name of science, and fake, and probably gay space.